Tonight on America's Hope, a story that you don't want to miss. The true story of a woman who witnessed history, a Chinese woman's fight for freedom. Meet Jennifer Zeng, who is dedicated to freeing China because she has the courage to believe. Tonight on America's Hope. Welcome to America's Hope. I'm Kelly Wright, and tonight we're talking about a very serious subject, the CCP persecuting its own people because of their desire to believe and practice their faith. For example, Christian pastors or Christian people in China have to go to a state-sponsored church. If they go to an underground church, they are often persecuted. Uyghur Muslims, persecuted. But tonight in particular, we're going to focus on Falun Gong, Falun Dafa, as some people say. That is a movement that goes back to ancient history in China, back to the proud traditions, or I should say, the humble traditions of truth, compassion, and forbearance. So tonight we're going to meet someone who is a member and a practitioner of Falun Dafa, and she is also, as you will see, a hope activist who endured so much in order to gain freedom. That's our focus tonight. Persecution in China. Persecution, but not in despair. Right, and joining me now is Jennifer Zeng. She is an incredible woman doing some remarkable things, but she has an incredible story to tell us. A story about her own life and her fight for freedom. Jennifer, welcome to the program tonight. It's a delight to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let me ask you how your life unfolded in China when you at one time had worked as a member of the Communist Party. You were a member of that. What happened to make things go wrong?
It goes wrong when in 1999, when the then CCP Chinese Communist Party leader Jiang Zemin decided to crack down on Falun Gong, an ancient spiritual practice movement based on three principles: truth, compassion, and forbearance. Because I had been practicing Falun Gong for 2 years. So as a practitioner of Falun Gong, I was arrested 4 times and then sent for the Beijing female labor camp to be tortured and brainwashed for a year. So where I witnessed and experienced unimaginable inhuman treatment. And sometimes I felt I was sent back by a time machine to the Nazi concentration camp, because I just couldn't believe this kind of torture, this kind of prison still existed in the so-called New China in the 21st century. So that was when things went wrong with me, purely because my practice of Falun Gong.
Wow, that's really unbelievable, because the practice of Falun Gong takes you back to the ancient traditions of China. Why was the communist, and why is the communist government of China so much against this practice?
Actually, if we look at the history of the CCP since it took power, every 10 or 7 or 8 years, there was a major campaign and political campaign targeting different groups. Sometimes it doesn't need a reason to target any specific group. Like now, it is targeting Uyghurs, Hong Kongers, Christians, Falun Gong practitioners. And maybe it's because CCP has its own fundamental fear regarding its own legitimacy, because there has never ever been an election inside China, and the CCP was never ever elected to govern China. So it always had this fundamental fear. So in order to, I think, deal with this issue, it has to maintain a certain level of fear in the society, so that people won't have the time or ability to question its illegitimacy. So every 10 or 7 or 8 years, it has been targeting a different group. Like in the beginning of its regime, it targeted the so-called landlords. It killed almost 2 million landlords, and then it targets the so-called business owners or capitalists, as they call it, in the cities, and then it's intellectuals in the anti-rightist movement. And then, of course, its Cultural Revolution, even CCP's own officials got persecuted, including Xi Jinping's father, right? And then it's a Tiananmen massacre where students got killed and massacred. And then 10 years later, it's Falun Gong. And the persecution goes on, and the list goes on and on. And I think for Falun Gong, one of the other reasons is Falun Gong's popularity, because it's a very obvious health benefit. So within 7 years since it's introduced to general public in 1992, so through the CCP's own investigation, they estimated that Falun Gong practitioners outnumbered the CCP members by 1999. So that became a huge problem. Although Falun Gong is not a political organization, or it does not have any political aspiration, but because of CCP's own fear, it's always fear that such a large group could have a political agenda, and somebody maybe stand up, say, oh, let's get rid of the CCP. So out of its own fear, it decided to target Falun Gong. And another thing I think is maybe the CCP's persecution of Falun Gong is inevitable, because what CCP is, or what Falun Gong is, and Falun Gong represents, and Falun Gong promotes, is truth, compassion, and forbearance, or tolerance. These values, these principles, are exactly the opposite of what the CCP believes is and has been. So Falun Gong's highest moral standard and conduct in the society, I think, embarrassed the CCP. So in this case, I think even if Falun Gong did not have so many practitioners, the CCP would still targeted it. If people all believe in truth, compassion, forbearance, nobody would believe in communism anymore.
You've written a book called Witnessing History, One Chinese Woman's Fight for Freedom. And you were just talking about at the top of the show how your fight for freedom actually was a difficult fight, being persecuted, imprisoned, and tortured. I'd like you to, if you could, to go back and elaborate on that a little bit more, because it was really a shock to you that the CCP started cracking down on Falun Gong, particularly given the fact that it was once accepted as a great practice for health and well-being. And then, as you said, out of fear, they began to crush it again because of the numbers of so many people making it such a popular practice in China.
Yes, I was very, very surprised when I heard that was in the morning on July 20th, 1999. It's exactly about 24 years now. I heard from a fellow Falun Gong practitioner at the same practice site and the park that the CCP would started to crack down on Falun Gong. And, the volunteers in the practice sites in 18 different provinces had already been arrested. So I wanted to go to the appeal office in the central government to appeal to the government against the persecution, because I had been practicing it. It offered me great health benefit, and I think there's nothing wrong with it. So as soon as actually I arrived near, I haven't really arrived, I was close to the government compound in Zhongnanhai. I was stopped by a police officer, and he asked me whether you are a Falun Gong practitioner. Upon saying yes, I was immediately arrested and pushed inside a bus. And then when the bus was filled with practitioners all over Beijing, or maybe some of them came from other cities, and then the bus full of practitioners were taken to a sports center in the western suburb called Shijinshan. So together with thousands of other fellow Falun Gong practitioners, we were detained in the sports center because there were no big enough space to hold or to detain so many Falun Gong practitioners. So that was my first arrest on July 20th, 1999. Of course, I was very, very surprised because I didn't expect a government would crack down on such a good practice that it had been supported until that time. I never imagined that I, as a member of the Chinese Communist Party, and I graduated from the top university of China, and I once worked for the actually state council, the highest level government policy consultant and research institute called the Development and Research Center of the State Council. I would never imagine that someday this thing would happen to me.